if you're going to have a bigger future, you're going to have to be more intentional about building that future versus having it unfold kind of organically or accidentally over time. So that was Ben's talk last year and the premise of the book. So I want to use this book as kind of the structure to look at how we might view how we hire salespeople and build our teams in the future differently. So if we look at this past, present, future, most people's present, where they're at now, is a result of kind of what happens accidentally, organically, incrementally over time that gets them to their present. And then without reflecting back, most people's future unfolds organically over time, definitely not planned, into a future state, and they end up in this future, and they're not exactly sure how they got there. And so you can look at people's personal lives. You can look at their, I'm an investor, so I talk to people about their investments all the time. And they'll say, well, I'm not really happy where I'm at, my net worth or whatever. I'm like, okay, here's where you're at. I can look back at their past and see some of the mindsets and skill sets about money that led them to their present state. And when people aren't happy in their present state, unless they're examining how they got there, and they're not intentional about where they want to go, their future becomes some form of refined version of their present, and nothing really changes over time. And so if you look at breaking patterns, I was just thinking of this earlier. I've told the Netflix Blockbuster story before, which is kind of the most told Netflix story, but the one I think that's more interesting is how Netflix had a present years ago where, if you know the history of Netflix, who had Netflix when they had DVDs? Many of you don't even know these even, yeah, so they had DVDs. So they had built a business and they had this present state of DVDs. And so they had a past where they started this company, and over time, they incrementally changed it, but they got to a place where they couldn't scale it and grow it to the level they wanted to based on a physical product. You really can't exponentially grow anything if it's in a physical product. And so they got to this place where it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? And they could only tweak and look at shipping charges and efficiencies and packaging so much. They could only get so much out of that. So they looked to the future and they walked into the future, which is really a core concept in Ben's book, is if you can walk into the future and imagine it, it might affect your present. So when they looked into the future and walked into the future 10 years, they said, well, based on technology and bandwidth and where it's going, we feel that people are going to be watching movies and consuming media through streaming, which it wasn't even probably called that at the time, and they bet the entire company on that. But it started with this future vision that brought it to the present state. You think of Apple, and they were computers and iPods, and then in January 2007, Steve Jobs comes out in his black turtleneck and he announces the iPhone because he knew where the technology was going looking into the future. There was no need for the iPhone at the time, but they created this future by imagining what the future could be, bringing it to the present. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at sales teams. Because most sales teams, and this room's an anomaly, but most sales teams present is a result of a past job profile, skill set, mindset, industry profile that brings people into an industry, gets them to their present. So the present state of a sales team now is most likely a result of some historical, unexamined version of what's happened over time. And what most sales teams have happen is their future state, whether it's a year, 2, 5, is some slightly incremental change version of what they had in the present. And based on what we're seeing now, and Dave talked about this morning with technology, and Jordan talked about it with his technology talk this afternoon, the rate of change of technology and how it's impacting sellers and where the buyer-seller dance is today, I don't see how anyone can be using the past method of job profiles, search models, job descriptions that create a future-based salesperson that's anything based on the past.